This week, we welcome Jason Nickola, the CEO and Senior Security Consultant at Pulsar Security, to talk about building an InfoSec career. In our second segment, we welcome back Sven Morgenroth, security researcher at NetSparker, to talk about HTTP security headers in action. In the security news, hackers target air-gapped networks of the Taiwanese and Philippine military. Stored cross-site scripting in WordPress Product Review Lite plugin allows for automated takeovers. Remote code execution vulnerability in VMware Cloud Director. A Shodan scan of new pre-auth remote code execution vulnerabilities shows 450,000 devices at risk, including all QNAP devices. And the top 3 cybersecurity myths, according to one source. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who just figured out that resistance is futile, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode 652, recorded on May 21st, 2020. I'm here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. My illustrious hosts for the show are also on the lines remotely. Mr. Lee Neely is with us. Lee, welcome.
Great to be here from southwestern Idaho. Just looking out the window, we got a bunch of snow on the hills around us. Very interesting weather for May.
Interesting. Mr. Tyler Robinson is at 72%, also in Idaho. Welcome, Tyler.
I thought I was doing pretty good at 72%.
Right. Mr. Jeff Mann up there, also on the lines remotely, is at 100%. Which is just phenomenal. It's awesome. You're fully charged. Jeff is fully charged and ready for the show.
Winning.
Tyler, you got a little work to do before you're fully charged.
I mean, I don't know if I can ever keep up with Mr. Jeff.
That's true.
Of course, Mr. Larry Pesce is here with us. Larry's at 10%, but he's charging. That's good. That's good.
Yep.
For those that only listen to the audio, Tyler uses a camera that he is unable to turn off the on-screen display. So it shows how much recording time. Looks like 6 hours, 5 minutes he has left. And in the other corner, it shows his battery life percentage, which just went down from 72 to 71 for those keeping track at home. There's a pool going to see what the number is going to be by the end of the show.
That's great.
We should just have an audience contest. Whoever guesses it gets a free Hack Naked t-shirt or something. In any case, join us virtually at InfoSec World 2020, June 22nd through the 24th. Security Weekly listeners save 15% off the InfoSec World main conference or World Pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click the register button to register with our discount code. Jason Nickola. Did I say that right, Jason?
You are one of the few people on the face of the planet that says it right the first time.
Interesting. Yeah. I thought like cola, like the soda cola. So Jason is a senior security consultant and COO at Pulsar Security, specializing in penetration testing and red teaming. He's also a SANS instructor for the Network Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking course. Jason, welcome. You're also a podcast host too.
I am. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, what's interesting is like Inception, because I'm going to ask you how you got your start in information security, and then we're going to do like an entire segment about getting your start in information security. Not even so much like a how-to, but I think a very interesting discussion from multiple perspectives. Jason, how did you get your start in information security?
So for me, it's maybe the worst story, because I started out as a salesperson. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was younger, like a lot of people don't. So I said, I'll major in business and study accounting and finance, and eventually got a job at a very, very small software company, and did that for long enough to realize that exclusively is great for a lot of people, but wasn't good enough for me. And the company that I was at was small enough that I could say, hey, I want to learn how to code, and I want to start learning technology, and did that just enough so that when we had a customer issue that no one else was available to diagnose, I dove into the code and took a weekend and did what I had to do to try to get it figured out, and then made enough headway that they let me transition to a more technical role. And I started doing help desk and did a lot of pre-sales engineering, and always did security on the side when I could find gigs doing it, and just practicing on my own and gaining skills. And then eventually it developed into what I think is the best career in the world.
Tell me about your build you got there in the background.
Oh boy. Yeah. So this was my first project for quarantine. It was time.
I did one of those too. Yep.
Yeah. And I went with the biggest case that I could find purposefully, because I'm terrible at hardware and things that are meticulous and actually keeping track of what I'm doing and not dropping things and planning for space. So I got a giant thermal take case, a couple Titan, RTX Titans, bunch of fans. Yeah.
Sweet. It's awesome. I like the colors.
It's loud. Yeah, I leave the fans all the way up because it impresses people.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. So, tell us about you were doing a podcast for SANS, correct?
Yes. So, like you said, I'm on the SANS instructor track, and right now I teach Sec 560. And somehow, along the way, I had this project kind of dropped on me, and GIAC came to me and they said, we want to do a podcast about, technical things, but also where the focus is more on how did these people that you see in the industry that are visible, that have had some success, how did they get their start? What were their challenges along the way? How they overcome them, with a real focus on things like imposter syndrome. So one of the things that I've always found to be really refreshing is when people who have made it or are really well known and very successful are just kind of open and honest about, look, what you see now, and even what you've seen on the rise isn't necessarily always reality. There's a lot of struggles along the way. So it's been a really cool experience to talk to some really capable and awesome people about how they got their start, how they built, and what struggles they had along the way, and how they got past them and continue to get past them, right? Because you don't really ever arrive. You just get different challenges, and hopefully they're better ones. But it's been a cool experience hosting that show so far. It's called Trust Me, I'm Certified.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we ask the question of all of our guests, how do you get you started in information security? We let them answer, and then we move on, right? Right. Your show focuses on that one question, which I thought was a very interesting and unique and awesome perspective.
Right. And I started out with a lot of assumptions. So I assumed that there was a standard track, and you've probably seen this asking the question across 600 plus episodes. There really isn't. Everyone starts by saying, my path was a little bit different, or I didn't follow the standard model, or I didn't do X, Y, Z. I did ABC instead. So I think, at least in terms of where the InfoSec industry is now, there isn't a standard path, just because 10 years ago, as soon as 10 years ago, there wasn't as much of an opportunity to major in cybersecurity, or as much a big industry as there is now. There weren't many security billion-dollar valuations a decade or more ago, right? So I think we might start to see that change as higher ed and the rest of the world catches up. But at least for right now, the common thread is that there really isn't a standard model. And there might be advantages and disadvantages to that.
What I think is really interesting to discuss is in the very early days, right, there really was no security industry, a cybersecurity industry, I should say, right?
Yeah.
And there were some people that were doing security, right? But there really wasn't an industry to have a path into, so to speak, right? There were people doing security, and that was that. Then I think, as we got into the late 90s, there started to be paths into security, right? Because there was this thing, you could be a security engineer. Those were, for a long time, very non-traditional paths into security.
Right.
Then I think, like you said, around 2010 or so, there started to be more and more opportunities to have a formal path, right? I could go to school and learn this stuff, and there is a path for me to be entry-level SOC analyst and, in various roles.
Right.
It's interesting to talk about, kind of the way back past, the present, and then what the future is going to look like. Like, what's it going to look like to break into security 20 years from now?
Right. Yeah, and a lot of the things that we hear from people before kind of that watermark that you put there in the late 90s is that you kind of had to force security onto people. It's like, I'm a sysadmin or a network engineer or developer, and you have to go make your case for why you should spend more of your time focusing on security.
Right. Or, security wasn't even really, a lot of us back then were like, I need to help my friend, crack the code so that they can play this video game, right? Or I need to, hack my DOS system with a different memory so that the game will actually run, right? It was basically a necessity.
Yeah. Well, there was also phone phreaking, and there was also cable hijacking.
Yep.
And then there was also DoD mission, but we won't go there.
Right. But we still have a lot of those same problems now, where you have to make your case a lot of times, but hopefully it's getting better. And I think there are more opportunities now because there are some of the standard, what we would call standard tracks, as you mentioned. But then I also wonder if you lose the opportunity to really get that generalist baseline, and there's a larger conversation around whether or not people should specialize or get more general skills overall. But at least for me and a lot of the people that I've talked to and worked with, having had time to write some code and configure networks and support customers and build systems and all of the other various aspects of technology that we've built baselines in is so beneficial from a security perspective, not just offensive security but defensive as well.
Jason. So on that point, I think it's really interesting. We were talking before the show about my research project. One of my research projects this week was, I bought this audio adapter. I've been doing podcasting 15 years, and for a long time I ran a lot of the cables, configured the gear myself. Right. I'm kicking myself for not studying some of this stuff at this detail sooner, right?
Right.
But I had no idea. I still there's a lot of significant gaps in knowledge about how electrical signals work and audio works, and it really comes down to physics and electrical engineering. So now I'm like, well, I want to know how this one little adapter works. I'm like, I haven't really taken the time to truly understand, the relationships between voltage and current and how impedance and resistance and all that stuff, because, like we were talking before the show, I get a couple of paragraphs in and then all of a sudden there's these big mathematical formulas and I'm like, I just want to plug cables in and make the show work.
Right.
But when I thought about it, I'm like, it's very similar to, like you said earlier, that folks should have some hands-on experience, do some very fundamental and lower level things such as programming. I would also, my kind of relation to that was people should understand how TCP/IP works, right? Of
course.
And understand how the internet works, understand the key protocols like DNS and SMTP and all the TCP headers and IP headers and all that stuff. And to me, that was my foundational knowledge. That's where I was spending my time studying so I could go forward in my career. I kind of wish I had read a lot of articles about electrical engineering back then, as kind of in between things. But the study of TCP/IP and how it works, I think, is those fundamental skills that if you're an audio engineer, you have to have those fundamental skills about how electricity works and physics, right? And I think it's very similar.
I couldn't agree with that more. And because you had that experience of having to go and figure out how the underlying networking works and dig into some topics that are pretty difficult for the average person, especially somebody who's building their career. It's almost like over time you start to erode this block that some people are born with, maybe some people learn to remove, but this block that says there's a difficult thing that I need to learn in order to move past this step or to make this
Correct.
thing happen. Are you going to dig in or are you going to move on? Right. And for me, having to dig into lots of things that I don't understand, and this happens to me all the time now, in order to move forward in some way, whether you found a technology or a web app or a coding language or something in an environment that you want to exploit, but you haven't seen it before. Having had to do that so many times, it's almost like second nature to me, and I've heard similar things from other people as well. And
well,
I
Jason,
worry that
that's a quality of a hacker. I mean, as we defined on the show.
That's what it is right there.
Right?
Yeah.
And you see very clear examples, and sometimes they're more clear than other times. But I was listening to the book about Stuxnet, right? And they were talking about the researchers at one point were reverse engineering some of the code and basically said, there's some code in here that's written in a language that we have never seen before. And these are pretty seasoned reverse engineers.
Right.
And it's a very specific, like, I think it was on the PLC kind of side of things. And they're like, they couldn't find anyone to help them, right? Put out a call for help. And finally they said, screw it. We're just going to go learn how to code in this language, right? Or learn as much as we can. We're going to go get the books. There was an interview that I did with someone who was presenting on hacking speech interpretation devices, you know, the Alexas of the world, right? And when he was talking, I'm like, did you get a degree in like audiology or something? He's like, no, I was interested in this subject, so I went up and I read about it, and, you know, he held up this, you know, classic textbook that people in that field study, right? And he's like, I picked up this book on, you know, basically how the human brain and ears and physiology interprets sound, and read it and did the best I could to understand it and apply it to my project. So it is very much a hacker skill and kind of in the ethos that we, if we come across something, like we have many times on a pen test, right? Well, I was going to test that, like, oh, I came across something I've never really seen before. Let me go spend 12 hours researching that. And to that end, it can almost be a double-edged sword, right? Because it's kind of in our DNA to go, when I come across something I don't understand, I'm going to go research it, right? And we got to learn to manage our time. Jeff, hold on. Jeff wants to weigh in.
Well, I just want to ask sort of a level-setting question here, just so we're all on the same page. In reference to building an InfoSec career, and we get through what you're describing as a process. At, you know, when we're done, what are we? Are we exclusively talking about security researchers, pen testers, red teamers, or are we being more inclusive to other related career fields that sort of fall under the umbrella of an InfoSec career?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of conversations that we've had on the show, and then just my own personal opinion, I think that some of the things that we're talking about apply more broadly beyond pen testers or security researchers, even to blue teamers and threat hunters, and even not security at all. I think that you can go find similar traits across lots of different industries, but it's more about, are you someone who wants to kind of move the needle in terms of where your understanding is, and try to get that new information and incorporate that into your working set, whether it's trying to, you know, reverse engineer a new piece of malware that's using a technique that you haven't seen before, or you more looking to get to a point where, you know, you reach that homeostasis and you're like, okay, I know how to do this stuff. I've kind of arrived, and I'm going to ride this as long as I can. I think that for the creativity and the inquisitiveness and kind of the impatience intellectually, I think I see that across red team, blue team, developers, researchers. I see it everywhere, I think.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, I think many of us that work in information security, whether, you know, you're doing malware reverse engineering, or, you know, you're a CISO or project manager or what have you, there's you know, a fundamental understanding that will allow you to do your job better, right? And certainly different disciplines within security have to know those fundamentals, maybe in a lot more detail than somebody else, right? But I think, grasping some of the basic concepts is important to everyone that works in information security. And let's not leave aside that one of those fundamental skills, in my opinion, is the ability to communicate at some level to many different audiences about security issues. And I think, I don't want to say security is unique, but certainly I believe in our roles as security professionals, there is a very high degree of likelihood that we will have to talk to some of the most technical people in our field, some of the sysadmins, network engineers, other security, and also talk to someone in accounting, finance, or one of our friends about, like, hey, I just got a virus. Can you explain this to me? Or be in a boardroom and go, what is the impact to the business on security? And again, I don't want to paint us as unique. Like, there are other fields that require that level of communication and interaction, but certainly in security, many of us, if not all of us, have been in all of those different situations where you have to communicate with multiple different groups of people and know how to tune the message.
Yeah, and you think of like healthcare and doctors and like you said, lots of other industries where they have to do the same kind of thing. And security is becoming more and more apparent as one of those places where there's kind of internal speak and then how we speak to the rest of the world. And I'd actually love to see more of the security industry get to a point where we are focused on how our message is being received by the general public at large, and less about us screaming at each other about whether or not you should use an app or a text message or a phone call for two-factor, when the rest of the world sees that and they're like, do I need it or do I not? Right. And then we can come up with scenarios where why one more complex thing is better than the other. But in reality, we just need people to start using two-factor authentication. Right. And I think the concept that you're talking about being able to communicate not just to other people who deeply understand what we're talking about from a grok level, it's more how can we move the needle with our companies and really society as a whole so that we're doing things in a more secure way.
Yeah, we were actually just talking about this with Dr. Doug on one of the webinars today, and one of the critical missing pieces that has kind of always been disassociated from technical people is the ability to communicate well and how to integrate not only communication into the offensive, or even just the InfoSec community as part of curriculum and the next generation moving forward, but also how to integrate like project management, time management,
of course,
the ability to do that technical writing, all the things that like people don't really tell you or kind of make or break in this industry. The technical side of what we do is, very, very technical and hard to do and, can be taught. It's a lot of the soft skills that you get through, decades of either experience, or now we need to short circuit that and get people writing better, talking better, and getting those soft skills early on. So we really have to figure out how to do that from a red team standpoint now.
Right. And I think what you see a lot is whether or not somebody is interested in moving the needle and making a difference and making something happen, or just doing the things that they want to do. Because if you want to make a difference and you want to build products or affect change from a policy perspective or user behavior and all that, you got to work with other people, and you have to know how to communicate, not just so that you can get your point across, but how do we try to be more inclusive, and how do we get the resources together that we need to actually make something happen, rather than I'm going to stay in a basement and yell at people on the internet about heap exploitation or something. And not that there's anything wrong with it, that's great, but right, not that there's anything wrong with that stuff, but
curmudgeon alert.
Right.
I dare say that some of this is not specific to our industry. Some of this is age and maturity of the population in general. And I would even say that, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and feel free to yell at me and scream at me.
I'm ready.
But I think that some of our current technology platforms, social media platforms, has anybody stopped and counted how many social media platforms they're monitoring right now during this self-isolation, by the way?
Yeah.
I think they exacerbate the communication problem rather than solve the communication problem.
Yes.
No,
Yeah,
I agree.
I couldn't agree more. And a lot of it has to do with the speed, right? If you feel like there is an imperative to respond very, very quickly, and you went the social media route, I'll even take it the just working with other people and working remotely and email and chat and those kinds of things. Speed is almost never a central component of delivering a good message. Or having your true intentions be voiced and understood and really heard on the other side. And social media, like you mentioned, is certainly not doing us any favors from that regard, because if we have filters left over, maybe we're not taking enough time for information to pass through those filters before we deliver them. So yeah, I definitely agree.
Well,
we've
I think it started. Sorry, I'll say this briefly and defer to Tyler. I think it started with whatever we decide was the first, nonverbal social media type communication, whether that was texting, SMSing, or chat rooms or IRC channels or whatever.
Right.
I mean, as soon as we did something other than face-to-face interpersonal communication, society went downhill, in my opinion. Go ahead, Tyler.
No, I mean that's exactly right. We've de-evolved from very articulate writing, from whether it be books or well-written manuscripts, down to 140 characters. Even prior to that, it was SMS. We had limited character space, and then we've stepped even further to that. We've now abbreviated half of our sentences, and we're using hieroglyphs, aka emojis. So we've literally de-evolved from a society down the communication path, and I think this is a real issue that I'm not sure how we actually step back from it, because even technological savvy people that have to communicate well regularly still step back into bad habits and have to interact on social media platforms.
I will say that the Egyptians
And there's some really great
quite a technologically advanced society. Don't.
I'm going to send you an emoji right now.
Well,
There's some really great aspects of it.
Facebook came out with the one with the emojis hugging the heart kind of thing. I mean, isn't that a game change? Never mind. I can't even say that with a straight face.
But then there are memes too, and I don't think anybody wants to get rid of those.
Yes, and memes help us get through things like quarantine.
They do. Yeah.
I just want to go back, Jason, when you interview people, because we don't often get into this with too many of our guests.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, some people think like, oh, like some of us just kind of fell into security and it was a wonderful journey. There's, like any career, bumps in the road, right? And to Jeff's point, this is unique to us, right? But what is unique to us is we may have had similar struggles and different ways to overcome them. And I don't want to discourage people from getting in the field if they do run into certain roadblocks. So when you're interviewing people, what are some of the things that they've mentioned as significant challenges and or mistakes that they've made along the way? And I wouldn't take any of those back, right? Because failure is a huge part of your success, believe it or not.
Yeah, and getting to the point where you realize that is a big part of the growth there. But I'll give a specific example that I don't think he'd mind me sharing, because he gave it to me on the podcast that he assumes that we assume other people listen to. Micah Hoffman, who you all know, who's in my opinion, one of the best guys we have working in the industry, does a lot of really great work in the OSINT field and is a SANS instructor and does lots of other things. He shared that
who are you kidding?
He's kind of at a tipping point in his career where, we start to decide we want to push ourselves out there and start speaking at conferences and doing some research and presenting and being more public facing. And right maybe before he started doing those things, imposter syndrome, which is a thing that's out there in the world now, but wasn't as talked about 5-10 years ago as it is now, he nearly got the best of him, and he almost left the industry and changed careers entirely just because, that fear, at least my understanding of it, and something I can relate to, is that fear of going out there and saying, I have something to share, and what are people going to think about me or say about me, or how am I going to be viewed when I do those kinds of things, can be a really, really difficult thing to do. Now, working in InfoSec doesn't mean you have to do those things. It does not mean that at all. But you can develop all the skills in the world that you want. And what I've found is that lots of people still question their abilities and whether or not they are in a role that they deserve, or whether or not they belong in the industry at all. So that was one of my favorite things that has been shared on the podcast so far, just because it was real. And I think there are so many people that go through that same kind of thing, and I can relate to it, where it's like it nearly gets the best of you and you almost pack it up and go a different route entirely. For him, I'm glad he stuck around because he's an awesome guy. But yeah, that was one of the main ones that I think kind of stuck with me.
Jason, you've uncovered some people's stories and people in the community that maybe they're thinking it's a short time for them in the community, that they try to get into security and for a variety of reasons are discouraged. I think it's probably one of the most important topics to cover in this segment, right, is to identify what those things are and work together, both us on the show and everyone listening,
of course,
to make sure that that doesn't happen moving forward. What are some of those things?
So one of them is being open about it. And I think you're starting to see this a lot more from people who are more established and, 5, 10, 20 years in, and people who are just getting started, where you're just being open. I'm struggling, or I can't get this thing. I saw somebody on LinkedIn who shared, they passed an exam, which is great. Lots of people share those kinds of things, but they also shared the results of the exam the first time they took it 4 or 5 months ago, where they failed, and they failed pretty good. And I think that more people sharing those kinds of things and being open and honest about their struggles as they move through, rather than another unfortunate side effect of the social media culture that we've developed, is curating your content and what you release into the world to make it seem like everything's great all the time. And anytime you sit down, the thing that comes out the other side is golden ice cream and everything's all good. I think that being open and honest about those things is a huge opportunity, because the struggles, and we can list them. Getting your first job, trying to make enough money, trying to learn all the skills that you need as technology changes very quickly, advocating for yourself, finding mentorship is a huge part of it. But that's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to go out in the community and say, hey, I need help, especially for certain populations. I'm a white guy from New Hampshire, and I understand that there are certain things that society grants to me nearly by default that I don't have to go out and look for a model of somebody who looks like me and sounds like me that has had success doing the kinds of things that I want to do. But the more we can try to enable people as they're going through their journeys and help them through some of the struggles that we've all shared, and try to create more opportunities for people of different backgrounds and different experiences, then I think we can start to move the needle on that stuff a little bit and make it so you don't have to beat your head up against a wall by yourself in a basement and just stick with it long enough until you make it in the industry. That doesn't seem like a realistic bar to require people to get to.
Right.
So,
we're
getting there.
There are aspects of that are important. I think
that's true.
For one, we've talked for a long time on this show, since the very beginning, in fact, when it was IRC and not necessarily Twitter and, Discord and all these fancy things we had, like back in the day. We had, even before that, we had, BBSs, and, then we had IRC. And when you speak with the people who were running communities and projects, even way back in the day, the more successful ones would tell you, basically, the rule that we carry forward in our chat channel today is, don't be a dick, right? So, and that means when someone's new, one example is that when someone's new and they're asking a question, don't discourage them, don't poke fun at them, don't be mean to them, try and help them. Now, the other side of that,
Paul,
is... Go ahead, Larry.
Paul, I think helping them is also encouraging them to be self-sufficient.
Yes.
Hey,
help them in a specific way.
Did you try to Google it first?
Yes.
What did you find there? Describe for me what you saw there. What did you try that didn't work already?
And that's that's something that was instilled upon me that I don't want us to lose sight of either, right? Because you don't want to give people a free ride and just give them all the answers, right? And in teachers, instructors, and mentors, the good ones know this, right? And have practiced this for a long time. When I started my first job in the 90s in technology, there was kind of this, it wasn't even an unspoken rule. I mean, it was a flat out rule. Paul's the new guy. And they were look, they sat me down look, you're the new guy. You're going to have lots of questions. Here's the rule. You got to go try and figure it out on your own for at least 30 minutes before you come ask us a question. And believe me, we'll know if you haven't spent that 30 minutes doing that based on the questions that you're asking. So I do think, but that is doing it in a, to your point, Jason, in a very healthy and open way, right? They were very open with me. Here's how it works.
You're part of something.
I was very open with them going, yeah, this time I only spent 10 minutes, right? Like, I'm going to be honest with you, right? Like, this is what it was, and I deserved, a tongue lashing for that. Like, I get it, but like, I really want the answer, right? And there are other times where I'm like, it can go in the other way too. Like, I spent 3 hours, and then they would be upset. Like, you don't spend that much time before you come and ask a question. So, there's a definite balance, and I'm a really big proponent of seeing that carried forward in a constructive manner today, because I don't want people to get discouraged.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to draw. And we've hired at Pulsar Security, we've hired a lot of people that have non-traditional backgrounds, which I get that we said
that's important
doesn't exist really in terms of the traditional background. But I think that they would kind of laugh at hearing me have to agree with you and make the distinction that I'm not talking about removing the intellectual struggle, right? Because that is a central component of growth. It is required, right? So if you're going to get an easy answer, it's not going to stick, and you're not going to know how to get the next answer. And I don't even necessarily mean to apply a level to that. Like at the beginning of the segment here, we were talking about research and having to research and apply things quickly to your job. I don't necessarily mean that has to be advanced or basic. The level of it doesn't necessarily matter at all. It's whether or not you can do those things, and whether or not you are in an environment and part of a team or a community where you are enabled to go about that intellectual struggle in a healthy way, or whether or not your lack of knowledge is used as a means of propelling you down while propping up others, which is something that happens in all walks of life across all industries, but it's something that I think we've seen in technology and security a good fair bit as well. So yeah, that struggle is so important, but how can we do it in a way that you don't have to overcome all of these social and communal and team-based negatives in order to achieve that intellectual, victory, I guess, that understanding.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what the future is going to bring for people coming into computer security. And I think that a lot of the students are a result of the teacher, right? And did you have a teacher that was teaching you the right way? And I'm not talking about like the answers, right? But mentoring you in the right way. So that when you come into the workplace, you don't have these expectations that, oh well, if I don't know, someone's just going to give me the answer, right? No, and especially in our field and many others, it takes a very analytical way of thinking. It's very much paying attention to details and picking out that one, thing that you may search for hours for before you find it, and having a lot of perseverance and persistence in this field and many others too. Not where we're unique snowflakes in the information security field. Certainly,
I think you're a unique snowflake.
Right. But there are a lot of parallels. Like my wife is an ultrasound sonographer. And I'm like, what we do is pretty similar. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, you literally take images of stuff, and then you're helping the doctors point out where the problem is. I'm like, that's pretty similar. Looking at like a packet capture and doing pretty much the same exact thing, right?
The
difference is someone's life isn't on the line most of the time in our field. In your field, most of the time someone's life is on the line. And that's a huge difference, right? But at that analytical way of thinking, not giving people the answers, is super important. So, what's the path for people in the future who can go to school, gain some knowledge, but maybe lack some of that, experience? How do we coach and mentor and keep that hacker spirit alive in the folks that are coming into the field? Not even just now, but 5-10 years in the future.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you put it that way, because you talked about we and the people who are here now and the people who will be in the industry then, when those people are starting to graduate and come in and get and start off with more security specific roles and not have to do things that are at other levels of technology. And I think it's so important that we have to be aware of it, and we have to continue to foster that culture and just be the shepherds of it moving forward. I think there's potentially some danger in some real siloing and specialization to the point where people don't really understand what's going on the other side of the hill, or what somebody else on the team does. And I'd hate to see that journey of, exactly like you're saying, struggling with something and not just getting the answer, and not having such a narrow niche of what you're looking at, that you only have so few opportunities to achieve that intellectual breakthrough. I think we've got to be aware of it. We've got to continue to shepherd it, and we've got to do our best to build that kind of culture into our teams. It's easier at smaller organizations, right? But even larger organizations where you have the right people in place and they have a stated goal and real effort behind fostering that kind of a culture, you start to see it grow in those places as well. So we have to keep that moving, keep it alive as best as we can.
Yeah, I think having constructive activities to continue your learning, once you come out of school, is super important.
Right.
And I think some of the capture the flag kind of exercises are important. I think some, there's certainly a ton of, free online training out there. Some of it's good. Some of it is absolutely atrocious. And some of it's really awesome. Right. And I think continuing to highlight some of that. I'll give another shout out to Pentest Academy and the attack and defense labs. Is that what he calls it? Attack and defense labs, right? Vivek's just done an amazing job,
right?
With that whole lab side. And I've talked since the last time I mentioned him, I think it was last week on a webcast. Since then, I've talked to a few people about it, and I've asked them point out, I'm like, have you ever seen anything like really that awesome for people out there? And they're like, no, that's like, it's really like people love it, right?
Right.
So
I've heard really good things. I haven't used it yet, though.
Yeah, and the nice part is you can start at any level, right? And I think that's some of the things that when I learn new things that I struggle with, is I'm like,
of course,
I don't know exactly even what question to ask right now, right?
Right.
And like, how far back do I have to peel this onion before I get to I need to understand what's in the center first, before I can come out and understand the mathematical formula for impedance, right? Before I do that, I got to understand the difference between AC and DC and the whole thing.
Right.
And that oftentimes, whether it's some field like electrical engineering or audio engineering, or it's security, sometimes we're like, well, I don't even know what question to ask. And I think guiding people to, this is the question you should be asking, here are some great resources to go start learning the fundamentals, right? Because oftentimes we have to back up and go to step one.
Yeah. Well, it was one of my
Step 0.
favorite memories of working with someone was a couple years ago at Net Wars in DC. There was a company that sent a bunch of people, and their technical guys were playing, but they had a marketer in the back of the room that was just watching. And I walked up to him and started talking to him and asked him what he did and why he wasn't playing. He's like, "Oh, I'm just a marketer." And I was like, "Oh, no, you got to come try," because he was clearly interested. So then we sat him down and we got his VM up and we got him running. And the way that it's set up is there are a few questions at the beginning that it's really guided. You can take hints, so it really is built, like you're saying, for different skill levels. And he started to get a few questions, and then I walked away, and then I came back, and then he had a few more questions on his own, and you could really see not to be overly sentimental or anything, but he had a sparkle in his eye. Like, he was excited. There was some magic there. He was like, well, I didn't think I could do any of this stuff, and I'm actually starting to do some of it and understand. And if you've ever taken someone who doesn't have any technical experience and showed them that the internet and web pages is just text in your browser, and kind of the look on their face that they're going to get if there's somebody that it might take that little nugget and start to run with it, that's a major part of mentoring and wanting to teach people, is seeing that in other people and enabling them. And
I think we need to continue and even do a better job of teaching people in that way, right? Because I almost in my own research this week, looking into all the audio engineering stuff, I'm like, what I really need is a really good SANS instructor. And instead of an hour class on malware reverse engineering, can you do an hour class and get me up to speed on all these concepts in electrical engineering, that would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we can't lose sight of the ability to teach people and enabling those who can teach really well. Many of us now, right, are teaching our kids in our homes. I don't want to call it homeschooling because it's like pseudo homeschooling, right?
I'm not homeschooling.
Right.
Are you at home? Are you schooling? It's homeschooling.
Yeah,
we're trying to teach them some stuff, but I don't have curriculum, and I don't have to meet any standards or anything.
And Jason's
you're probably better off without curriculum.
Every state is different, right? And then there are many different forms of homeschooling, which is why it kind of loses the term, right? So my kids have a curriculum; they have lots of online resources.
Right.
They also have access to teachers in virtual classrooms. And so I'm like laying fruit out on the table to teach my son, the commutative and associative properties of mathematics, right? And that's just one instance where I was like, wow, I think I did a pretty good job. And he got it. I'm like, I think I did a pretty good job explaining to him. Now, I'm not saying, again, kind of going back to you can just feed social media all positive things. That was an example, just one example. I'm like, I think I got it right. Now, the other 75% of the time, I'm like, holy crap, teaching is hard, and I have no idea how to explain this to you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah.
And the cynical side of me thinks that a lot of times in security and technology, content that gets released is sometimes more about the person who wrote it and is trying to teach it and their ability to show what they know, rather than how can I present this in such a way that really sticks, which is what I think separates some of the really great content providers and instructors that we have in the industry from people that are just putting stuff out there in the world.
Jeff?
I wanted to say that you're making me feel a little bit better about life choices I made early on. I will divulge at this point that I too was a business major in college.
So was I.
And
I'm right there with you.
I kind of went a different route than you did, but I digress. But there came a point when I was working in the DoD where I had an opportunity to go to grad school. I had the opportunity to do to work 20 hours and go to school for 20 hours. Most people went the grad school route, and I was just getting into this field, shall we say. And I decided I would rather go back and get an undergraduate degree and learn computer science and learn all the fundamentals and the basics, rather than doing all the advanced stuff. And I did, and here I am today, for whatever that means. But I think I made the right decision based on what you're saying.
Well, I think that it is a path, right? I don't necessarily want to dispel people from going a different route, but at least my personal opinion is that I come against things so often that I want to learn or do where there's like one piece of it, maybe 10% of it that is related to some thread that's related to some thread, but that is related to some thread because I had to set up an Active Directory environment in a test thing that I had to set up so I could support a customer, or some basic thing I had to do in desktop support, or something I learned for basic networking in TCP/IP or whatever. And that stuff comes up so often that I sit there and wonder if I hadn't had the opportunity to really start with the basics and not skip steps, where would I be? How would I figure this out? And maybe I wouldn't even have the ability to recognize when you have to take a step back and say, wow, I really have to get deep in the fundamentals here and get some basics, because like Paul's saying, I don't even know how to construct my question. It exactly like your background, getting that fundamental baseline enables you so much in the future to understand later technologies and identify trends over time, and even new things, right? You start to realize, well, this is just a different framework for doing something that we used to do a different way, and I can kind of understand it that way. You develop those schemas, right? Where if I, just came out today and I had to go be an analyst or an incident responder or work in a SOC or something, like I don't know how I would do it.
Question.
Go ahead, Louis.
So I was thinking about, we were all talking about the value of knowing the basics, and I remember, when I was in college, I did take a computer science class, but it was through the math program, so I got hopeless amounts of math. And I did learn, logic gates and writing microcode in the CPU. And I don't know that most people need to go that low.
Right.
When we were learning computer graphics, we actually learned the math before we went and did it on a computer.
Lee, that's because you had to on computer systems back then.
Right.
It's just
I'm thinking, how basics is basics these days? How low do you have to go? I mean, I don't think anybody needs to learn ArcNet or even LU6.2. When I took my first big networking class, the guy was saying, forget this CSMA CD stuff. It'll never last. Token bus is what's going to be the killer technology.
Right.
Lee, you almost made me spit out my drink with that one.
So
I'm going to say PCI right now, but in a different context.
Yeah, but back then, Token Ring did have the advantage. In speed.
It was way better than Ethernet.
No, well, speed-wise, I would argue speed-wise.
Local area network.
Yeah, performance-wise, not necessarily reliability, because you had the young college intern who would plug the wrong cable and break the ring. And then
none of the rest of us ever did that.
Yeah,
right.
No, I was cleaning out.
Yes, it's a great question.
The other day.
Sorry.
And actually throughout some of my networking course stuff from college, in the early '90s, and one of the articles that we were handed out photocopied was an article about FDDI.
Oh,
like
Fitty.
That was before it was sent. 50 cent.
That's almost as good as Lincoln Logs if you're following the Discord channel.
Hello, boys and girls.
Hey, it's Mr. Joff. Hey, Joff, you're just in time. Hey, we're talking about how to get your start in information security, and we're here with Jason Nickola. Do you have any questions for Jason?
Wow, talk about being put on the spot.
I have a question if you want to think a minute, Jeff.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Jeff? You shoot first.
I did. I put Joff on the spot.
You did. I'm stalling on behalf of Joff right now, so don't say I never did anything for you, Joff. So at the very beginning, you were introduced as being someone that at your company does both pen testing and red teaming. So I thought it'd be a great question to ask you.
We don't have time for that, Jeff.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
He should know. If he does both, he should know the answer. And he should be used to fielding that question.
You're 100% right. I am. And I'll explain it the way we explain it to customers. Well, actually, no, I won't. I'll explain it the way that I don't explain it to customers. The way that I don't explain it to...
let me sum up.
Yeah, the way that I don't explain it to customers is if you want me to do a pen test for you, then you probably don't actually want me to do any exploitation. That unfortunately is the most common interpretation of it that I see, where they really want a vulnerability assessment. But let's shed those ones and just talk about the ones that actually want penetration testing. I look at that as more like isolated. There's something that you want us to poke into for the sake of trying to exploit something, and there is more value of it beyond that. What harm can you cause in an environment by exploiting some condition or pivoting from one area of the network to the other or accessing something? So I think that's important to understand, but the red teaming side of it, where I see the real distinction, is the word team there necessitates a blue team. And that's the way that I look at it, is if you want us to do a red team engagement, we really are looking for what are your processes, what's your detection, what's your response, what are you doing on the other side? And that's more what we're testing, rather than saying, does this technical system have something that we can exploit and try to achieve some outcome, rather than we're testing you and your people and your processes and your ability to respond to what we're doing. That's the way that I look at it anyway.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective in terms of what the differences are. Again, we've done like whole hour-long segments where we talk about the difference between a penetration test, a red team, a purple team, and a full-on attack simulation, adversary simulation, I should say. So I guess you could throw attack simulation in there too.
You could.
Can I ask my question now?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So my question is this, and
better be a good one.
It is a good one. Tyler and I were talking about this earlier. Do you think that it is possible to be a good security professional, in particular a good red teamer, if you don't have any prior operational experience?
Is it possible? Yes, I think it's definitely possible, because I think that there are lots of people who have the ability to fill in blanks along the way, but it requires some support. Like if you're just, you're existing in a vacuum and they pop a laptop in there and they say, fill in all the blanks yourself, that's going to be pretty difficult. But if you're at a decent organization with some people who have some real experience, and they can help fill in some of the blanks for you, I personally have met some people that I think are going to go and become operational, and they're going to go do things on their own time or carve out portions of their day or whatever they have to do to fill in a lot of those blanks that I think that you get from years and decades in the trenches of being operational, like you're saying. It's harder. I think it's easier to have some of that experience ahead of time, which goes a lot into some of our earlier conversations about
sounds like
basics.
Jason, like you could be that pen tester that doesn't have operational experience, provided you had other people on your team that did have that operational experience to ask questions. Right.
Yeah, and eventually you get there, but it's hard to get there without the support of people that do have that knowledge, or at least the ability to point you in the right direction.
And I would argue there's different levels of operational experience, right? Like I can gain operational experience trying to keep my home network running,
right?
But doing that in the enterprise when you've got tens of thousands of endpoints, and 5,000 network drops and the whole thing. Even still, that's different, right?
Right.
Okay.
Can you get enough of it? I guess.
Paul did say the word enterprise, and so that requires everybody to drink right now. So.
Oh, sweet. We're drinking on enterprise now.
I was going to restate the question, given that, the enterprise is changing so much today. What is operations looking like today and in the near future? And is it still something that's going to be not necessarily a prerequisite but preferred path to getting into security or a red teaming field? Or given the changing field of operations and what operations is, how do we make sure that people that are coming up get the right kind of experience that they need, similar to generations in the past that came up through operations?
Cool. Heavily loaded.
Oh, for sure. And I think a lot of people will disagree with my answer, and I'm very interested to hear what other people think. But I think a lot of it is the ability to script and how you can manage and deploy cloud resources and think about scale. So in some ways, I think that it is easier to become operational today and in the next phase of things than it was in the past, because a lot of that stuff is more scripting and your ability to deploy solutions.
No, see, Jason, I'll disagree. I think that you could, in the cloud, set up a bunch of enterprise, air quotes, systems, right, and script and manage those all day long. Until you've done that for a real business that has multiple teams that have to work together, and you have to put in 3 change requests, and you have to deal with tickets from the help desk, and all of the operational and interpersonal things that happen in an enterprise, that's a completely different skill set. Like, I think the technical aspect versus the experience working, because as pen testers that we were the ones that we were on the help desk and we were on the operations team, and now we're doing a pen test, we understand a lot of those little nuances that, quite frankly, it's kind of unfair that we take advantage of them today, to be quite honest with you, right?
It really is. It really is. Hey, can I tell a quick story, Paul?
Yeah, go ahead. Geoff, tell a story, and then we're going to do 5 questions with Jason.
So really, really funny story. I'm going to go back to the days when I was a faculty consultant and student consultant helping out people at the university, okay? I had a lovely young lady come to see me, and that was my favorite part of the job, by the way. And she said, my floppy disk is not working. And this was in the days of 5 1/4, okay? We're not talking 3.5-inch floppy disk. All right? I said, why not? She goes, well, just hang on a second. Let me get it out of my purse. And she reaches into her purse and she pulls out the floppy disk. And I look at it, and it's like this. All right? It's curled over like this, but it had a beautifully typed label on it.
And let me guess, Jeff, when she handed it to you, she was touching a little part that looked like a giant pill instead of the middle and handing it to you, right?
But I gotta tell you, man, the label was pristine. I'm like, okay, some of you don't remember, there used to be this thing called a typewriter. And she had rolled that thing into the typewriter and then typed up the label.
Wow.
Especially the 8-inch floppies. They were easy to roll into a typewriter.
Yeah. So we, again, that same box, FIDI instructions, we found a bunch of save icons in the same box.
That's right. Sweet.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right, let's do the 5 questions.
All righty. Jason, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I think so.
3 words to describe yourself.
That's
one.
Oh boy, that's a tough one. The first one would probably be
Well, that's way more than 3 words.
I'd say head above water.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Ooh. I would say ice, but I know that that's very, very cliche. So I'll say nanobots.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Figuring it out.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
First, just because of what I think going first says about your personality.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh, yeah, missed it.
Nick Offerman. I think he'd be a great dad. And then, what's the woman's name from The West Wing that plays the press secretary? What's her name? She'd be a great mom. She's a great actress. I can't remember her name at the moment, though.
You know Allison Janney?
Yeah, yes. Yeah,
no,
she'd be a great
not
mom.
Allison Janney. It's not Allison. It's
that is Allison. Yeah, she'd be great. Yeah, those are my
Google
two.
it.
Nick Offerman, Allison Janney.
We're all Googling like crazy right now.
Google
it's not Allison Janney.
Go to the Googles.
It's definitely Allison Janney.
Anyway,
It's pronounced Go Ogle.
You nailed that.
Go Ogle.
Go Ogle. That's right. It's called Go Ogle. Yeah.
And the winner is... Joff, you could write like an entire Python application from memory without using the internet, but we asked you to Google.
Since when do we allow people to go to the Gowoggle during the 5 questions?
That's right.
Come on now.
It's not a comprehensive list, man.
It's the press secretary from West Wing. Jason, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. Now, Jason, where can people find your podcast?
So we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. You can go to giac.org/podcasts and sign up that way too.
That's the easy giac.org/podcast. Jason, thank you very much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
With that, we'll take a short break. Come back. Sven from NetSparker talking about HTTP security headers. Stay tuned.